To support his family, he tied his life to a single rope every day. Between steep cliffs and jagged rock faces, he searched for seabirds nesting along the shore. One day, just after catching one, he heard his daughter urgently calling from the top of the cliff. Esmar gave up the front row spot he had fought so hard to get and handed it to another villager. Then he carried his daughter on his back and hurried home without stopping, because Samuel, the man his daughter mentioned, was not only the owner of the land they lived on, but had also been eyeing his wife for years. Samuel had admired Johanna since they were young. He once thought she would marry him, only for her to choose Esmar, a bird catcher, and give birth to 2 daughters in a row. Under the island's harsh law, if a tenant farmer failed to produce a male heir before the lease expired, the landlord had the right to reclaim the land and deny any renewal. There was only 1 year left before Esmar's lease ran out. If the baby in his wife's belly turned out to be a boy, they could keep living in this house. Otherwise, they would be thrown out into the wilderness. Excited, Esmar pulled the lease from the cupboard and pointed to the terms, telling Samuel that Johanna would definitely bear a son and meet every condition for renewal.
En søn. Tror du fra Nattelsbed? Denne gang bliver det en søn.
After driving Samuel out, Esmar looked like a victorious warrior. He hugged his wife in excitement, as if he had already gotten the son he wanted and the family crisis had been lifted. But at that very moment, Johanna was suddenly struck by labor pains. Clearly, the time had come. Esmar seemed to have endless strength in him. He hoisted the midwife onto his back and raced home as if his feet barely touched the ground. His wife's cries of pain from inside the room left him on pins and needles. He held his 2 daughters tightly in his arms, yet his younger daughter wore a calmness far beyond her years. She quietly declared that she would never have children in her life. When a clear newborn cry pierced through the door, Esmar suddenly trembled all over, gathering nearly all his courage. He pushed the door open and finally saw the tiny life carrying all his hopes. But the tears on his wife's face silently revealed the answer, and Esmar's heart sank at once. No matter how unwilling he was to believe it, he had to face the fact that he had been given another daughter. His desperate cry shattered Johanna's joy as a mother. The arrival of a 3rd daughter brought no hope. Instead, it once again laid the family's brutal reality bare before them. Even 6-year-old Vigdis could read the heavy disappointment surrounding her parents. She often followed her father to the dock market to sell goods. The round trip took 2 hours, yet she never complained of being tired. She observed the world through quiet, thoughtful eyes. She believed that if she acted more like a boy, she could drive the sorrow from her parents' faces. But her small shoulders were ultimately powerless against the cold boundaries society had drawn around women. That day, father and daughter brought dried herring, 2 animal pelts, and a seabird. As always, Livia, the innkeeper, took the bird, partly because her kitchen could use it, and partly because it was her way of supporting Esmar's business. When she heard that Johanna had safely given birth to another girl, she immediately drove over to visit her friend. But what greeted her was Johanna's face, clouded with worry. Livia owned a book written by a famous doctor in Paris. Inside were passages about problems with childbirth. She shared her theory, along with a possible way to conceive a son, but that idea stirred a storm inside Johanna. Meanwhile, Esmar delivered the month's rent to Samuel. In return, he received nothing but icy ridicule. Samuel mocked him for having yet another daughter. Unwilling to back down, Esmar declared in public that before the year was over, he would surely father a son and satisfy the lease terms. But after all that bravado, he had no confidence at all. That heavy anxiety followed him everywhere. Even bird catching, the thing he did best, began ending in repeated failure. That night, Johanna told her husband that Livia had come by and laid out 2 possible paths for them. The first was for him to take another wife. Before Johanna could finish, Esmar rejected the idea outright. In his heart, Johanna had always been his only wife. His response warmed Johanna's heart, but the second path stuck in her throat, and she could not bring herself to say it. She only lowered her eyes and asked Esmar to speak with Livia himself the next day. The next morning, when Vigdis saw her father preparing to leave, she hurried over, hoping to go help him again. But this time, Esmar did not take her. Instead, he pushed the cart to the harbor alone, weighed down by his thoughts, forced to stay home. Vigdis puffed up in anger like a little blowfish. She had no interest in learning to bake bread, and she hated her mother's constant talk about becoming a good wife and mother even more. Her daughter's rebellion had already drained Johanna's patience, but before she could catch her breath, Samuel once again appeared at her door like a lingering shadow. Before marriage, Johanna had been recognized as the most beautiful girl on the whole island. She was also Samuel's untouchable ideal. Even after she married and had children, Samuel never gave up. For more than a decade, he had remained alone, waiting for the day he could take Johanna back. He promised that if Johanna agreed to leave Esmar and become his wife willingly, he would give her a wealthy and respectable life. He would also treat her daughters as his own. In truth, Samuel's rough nature had already shown itself when he first pursued Johanna. That was exactly what allowed her to see his true character and choose Esmar all the more firmly. Once again, she rejected Samuel without mercy. In a calm voice, she told him that even if he came 1,000 times, her answer would remain the same. At that moment, Esmar had no idea his rival had shown up at home. After reaching the harbor, he was about to find Livia, but an old friend from his rowing days came over first and invited him back into competition. Esmar took a deep breath, forced down his agitation, and walked over to Livia. At that moment, she was behaving intimately with a Frenchman. It was obvious their relationship was far from simple. Livia told him to come find her after he finished selling his goods, and promised they would talk then. After emptying his cart, Esmar went to the inn as agreed, only to unexpectedly catch her in an intimate moment with that Frenchman.
Välkommen.
After getting dressed, Livia invited him inside. She took up the same book she had mentioned to Johanna. Although the book did not clearly explain how to conceive a boy, it did suggest one possibility. If a couple could not produce a son, perhaps their bodies simply were not compatible.
Vad Johanna ska göra. Men ni måste ju vara ense om det. Om en annan man.
Esmar could hardly believe what he was hearing, and he could believe even less that fate would mock him so cruelly. Only the night before, he had sworn he would never take another wife. Yet now, the second path before him demanded that he push his own wife into another man's arms. That one possible way out swallowed him whole, like freezing seawater beneath the cliffs. But he had almost no time left. Morality, emotion, and reality pressed in on him from every side, finally hardening into a choice he could no longer escape. This time, he did not rush home as usual. Instead, he drowned himself in bitter drink, searching for a moment of numbness. But drunkenness always fades, and what had to be faced could not be avoided forever. Anything a boy can do, I can do too. That was the sentence the 6-year-old girl kept earnestly repeating to her father. All she could see was the sorrow on her parents' faces after having 3 daughters in a row. What she could not understand was why such a law existed at all. Why a family without a son did not even qualify to keep renting its land.
Gick vi på någon annan?
Nej. Vill inte det?
Det lämnas ju så långt.
Her daughter's words struck Johanna awake in an instant. All this time, she and her husband had focused only on having a son before the lease expired. They never realized that this heavy, invisible pressure had already been sharply sensed by their little girl. The child's innocent words pierced Johanna's heart like a needle, but the one hurting even more was her husband, Esmar. He could not bear the thought of sending his wife to another man just to have a son. Yet with every day he hesitated. The risk of his whole family ending up homeless only grew. After drinking himself into a stupor, he finally staggered home while pushing that stubborn wheelbarrow. Johanna stayed awake all night. At last, at 3 in the morning, her husband returned. Early the next day, she sent their 2 older daughters away to gather seaweed by the shore. Once they were alone, she and her husband continued discussing that crushing issue. Invisible pressure hung over the family like a giant net. Esmar paced back and forth in the yard, venting his frustration. Johanna tried to suppress the turmoil inside her through the repetitive motion of washing. In different ways, both husband and wife were expressing the same unease. Their 2 daughters tried hard to be sensible, helping with chores on their small shoulders, but their efforts still could not move the cold reality before them. That night, husband and wife lay together in bed. After avoiding the matter all day, Esmar finally spoke first.
Vill du?
Nej. Men här vid några väl. Hettar okkar senaste möjlighet.
Hvordan kan vi være sikre på, hvad det bliver?
Yet what frightened Johanna even more than whether they could have a son was what would come after success. How was she supposed to face the benefactor who entered their lives? Johanna had already turned that problem over in her mind 1,000 times. Staring at the beams above her, she whispered out her conditions. The man could not be local, and he had to be strong and handsome. On that ordinary night, the couple made an extraordinary decision beside their pillows. 2 days later, The family went to the harbor under the excuse of watching the annual rowing race, but that was not their real reason for coming. One knowing nod between Esmar and Lydia conveyed the decision they had finally made. The couple sent their 2 daughters ahead to save seats. Then they followed Lydia back to her inn.
Ja, men idag är det många här som kommer långt bort ifrån och som kanske aldrig mer kommer tillbaka. Så välj vem ni vill, så tar jag hand om samtalen.
Reality had forced Esmar to accept this absurd proposal, but emotionally, it tormented him, so when he saw the faint smile on his wife's face, he even interpreted it as anticipation for some unknown pleasure, perhaps driven by jealousy. He suddenly joined the rowing team himself. He wanted to display his masculine strength before everyone, especially before the rival he had imagined in his mind. With the crack of a gunshot, the fierce race began. Esmar poured all his strength into every stroke. As water splashed around him, his eyes sharply scanned the visiting crews. At last, he fixed on one man from the French team. That man was none other than the French captain who had a close relationship with Lydia. He not only possessed excellent command, but also remarkable adaptability and tremendous physical strength. From every angle, he fit the couple's chosen standard. With Esmar on the team, the winner was no longer in doubt. Even so, the French captain's impressive performance sincerely won his respect. After discussing it with her husband, Johanna also felt that this man was the best choice. Lydia never imagined that after all their careful searching, the man they chose would be the one she loved. Every year when the captain came to the island, he stayed at her inn. They had no formal title as husband and wife, yet their closeness and understanding had long surpassed that of ordinary couples. But since she had already promised to help, she could only swallow the bitterness rising inside her. The couple came to the inn and waited anxiously for the result. Meanwhile, Lydia spoke with the captain alone. The reason she was willing to lend out the man she loved was that Esmar had once saved her life. If helping the couple now truly allowed them to have a son, then she could count it as repaying that debt. The captain finally agreed, though reluctantly, but his agreement cut into Lydia's heart like a fresh wound. Even so, she personally bathed and dressed Johanna. She even sprayed her with the captain's favorite perfume. And when Esmar saw his wife dressed so beautifully, something inside him tore open as well. Under cover of night, the 3 of them rowed toward the large ship anchored nearby. On deck, Esmar and Lydia tried to drown their sorrow in drink, but the bitter liquid could not extinguish the torment in their hearts. Meanwhile, Johanna had already entered the cabin with the captain to carry out that heavy plan. 1 hour felt like an entire century to the 2 waiting outside. When the figures from the cabin finally reappeared, they at last breathed a sigh of relief. That night, all 4 of them were destined to remain sleepless. But for Esmar and Johanna, it also felt as though a spark of hope had finally appeared. The next day, the captain was set to return to Paris. Before leaving, he reminded his lover to write to him. He badly wanted to know how things would turn out, whether Johanna would successfully become pregnant with a son. At last, fate showed mercy to this family. Johanna became pregnant with the captain's child as hoped. Alongside their joy, the couple also felt hope and unease tangled together. Their 2 older daughters seemed to sense something and became especially helpful in caring for their youngest sister. After months of anxious waiting, Esmar once again set out to fetch the midwife. And this time, there was less than a week left before the land lease expired. On the day of renewal, Samuel believed victory was already his and eagerly awaited the chance to humiliate his rival in public. But to his surprise, Esmar truly arrived carrying a baby boy. Samuel very reluctantly signed his name on the renewal contract. Then he stormed out of the mayor's office in anger. At last, the boulder pressing on the couple's hearts had been lifted. The dark clouds hanging over them for more than a year finally scattered. They had no idea how to repay the captain's kindness. So Lydia suggested naming the child Francois, meaning Frenchman, but Johanna felt that would be unwise, fearing the name might invite unnecessary gossip.
Vad säger ni om Frans?
Frans bliver det. Fortæl din kaptajn, vi døber vores søn Frans. Bliver han så glad?
Ja, han blir mycket glad.
While the couple rejoiced that the crisis had passed, they overlooked the resistance in little Vigdis's eyes. Deep down, she believed this new baby had stolen away her parents' love. One night, she even crept toward the crib with a pillow in her hands. Johanna did not shout at her daughter or wake her husband. Instead, she placed the baby in Vigdis's arms and let her feel the brother connected to her by blood. Then she quietly told her the unchangeable truth. Homes and land were passed to sons, not daughters. They had no power to change it, only to accept it. Her mother's gentle guidance dissolved the darkness in Vigdis's heart, and finally allowed her to accept the baby's existence from the bottom of her heart. Yet the danger facing this family was far from over. Somehow, Samuel heard rumors that one night, The couple had boarded a Frenchman's ship and returned to shore an hour later.
Livia, hun bjóði okkur niður á bátnum til Notra. Hvað vilt þú? Ætlaðu nú að eitra okkar lífið til spillandi tunga?
Although they managed to silence Sommel for the moment, Johanna's unease did not fade. She feared that gossip would harm the entire family. Lydia told her there was no need to worry, even if someone had really seen them board the ship. No one would connect it to their son, because everyone on the island knew the captain was her lover. But when speaking of her lover, a wave of disappointment rose in Lydia's heart. A month earlier, she had written to the captain to tell him Johanna had safely given birth, yet no reply had ever come. Everything seemed to have reached the most perfect ending possible, but Lydia still saw an unmistakable trace of loneliness on Johanna's face. It was the same look she wore whenever she longed for the absent captain, as if both women carried a wound inside them that could never fully heal. From the moment they made that decision together, the stalemate between Esmar and Johanna had perhaps already been sealed. The long-awaited child may have been the family's salvation, but he also became a thorn forever lodged in Esmar's heart. After fathering 3 daughters in a row, he finally got the son he wanted and kept the land and house his family depended on, but the boy's face, which looked nothing like his own, became a knot in his heart that he could never untangle. Esmar endured that torment for 7 full years. At last, the nameless anger inside him spilled onto the innocent child. Young Franz could not understand why every time he argued with his sisters, his father's rebukes always seemed to fall on him. The hurt he felt was far greater than the anger caused by the quarrel itself. Until one day, when the whole family went to the dock market, the first corner of that huge mystery in his heart was finally lifted. Sommel, who had never stopped harassing Johanna, still had not given up, though he had no real proof. He remained convinced that Esmar could never father a son, and that Franz's real father had to be the French captain. Sommel told Johanna that her son looked more and more like his father, and now that he was older, he deserved to know who his real father was. Johanna told him to stay away from her son, and that he would never have her. After being rejected, Sommel actually slipped a coin to the leader of the children and had him spread the rumor in public. Soon, cries of Franz as a bastard drifted through every corner of the harbor on the salty sea wind, and pierced straight through Franz's young pride. Seeing his son's torn clothes and bleeding nose, Esmar did not blame him this time. Instead, he patiently told him not to care about those cruel words. They would always be a family, and he would always be his only father. The closeness of this family genuinely pleased Lydia, but whenever she thought about how the captain had not returned to the island in more than 7 years, and had not even sent a single letter, something still felt wrong. That long silence filled her with a vague unease she could not explain. One day, Esmar went to the cliff as usual to catch birds. His younger daughter Vigdis stayed on shore, teaching her brother how to manage the rope. But before Esmar could even begin, he saw a foreign ship approaching from the distance. It was the very French cargo ship that had haunted his heart like a nightmare for more than 7 years. Esmar told his wife that he had returned. When he saw that no expected joy appeared on her face, Esmar secretly breathed a sigh of relief. But Lydia's heartfelt happiness at seeing the man she had longed for could not be hidden at all. She quickly composed herself and adopted a polite, distant manner, as if she and the captain were merely ordinary acquaintances. No one knew that inside, her heart had already become a raging sea. She never imagined that the lover who had vanished for 7 years had already married another woman, but even more painful than his absence was a crueler truth. The captain had actually received every single one of her letters. He knew perfectly well that Johanna had borne a son who looked very much like him. Lydia struggled to keep herself calm and not lose control. Yet when she went to prepare drinks for the captain's wife, that faithless man followed her into the room. He softly begged Lydia for forgiveness, but his years of silence had already wounded the woman who waited for him beyond repair. He asked Lydia to take him to see his son. Lydia knew very well that Esmar and Johanna had already suffered enough from gossip all these years. If the captain went to see Franz now as his father, it would be like pouring oil on fire. The rumors would only grow even more vicious. That would hurt the poor couple all over again, and in the end, the most innocent child would suffer too. Faced with the captain's desperate pleading, she remained unmoved and firmly refused him. Still, after they left, she went to find Esmar at once. She carefully kept Franz outside the door so he would not hear the adults speaking, but she had no idea that every single word they said was heard by Franz, who was lying beneath the window. After all, the captain had once done them an enormous favor. The couple both felt they should not refuse his request to see the child. And to reassure her husband, Johanna did not go along. She only let their son accompany Esmar to the inn. All the way there, Franz's heart felt heavy. The conversations and rumors he had overheard had already allowed the sensitive boy to sense part of the truth. Before entering, Esmar gently bent down and told him that the couple inside had once helped their family. He only needed to go in, greet them politely, and they would soon return home. Esmar could not understand the French the captain spoke. He simply could not understand why the captain's wife showed no resentment at all. Her eyes, too, were full of expectation when she looked at Franz. After the meeting, Esmar could not wait to take his son home. But once again, the ever-present Samuel blocked their way. Esmar warned Samuel to mind his own business. After they returned, everything seemed to settle down again, yet Esmar's heart remained uneasy. Like the terrifying stillness before a storm, the captain claimed he would stay on the island for only 2 days. But as long as he remained, Esmar and Johanna could not fully put their hearts at ease. Meanwhile, the captain went to see Livia alone. After rekindling their old passion, he finally confessed the real purpose of his visit. He had come to reclaim Franz as his son, because his wife could not bear children. They had remained childless throughout their marriage. Now his grandfather had died and left behind a large inheritance. If he had no heir, all of it would be seized by his cousin's family. He begged Livia to help him reclaim the boy, promising that if she agreed, he would divorce his wife and be with her. The captain's offer was extremely tempting, but Livia's reason and her feelings began pulling against each other, dragging her into a struggle unlike any she had faced before. After thinking long and hard, she finally decided to find Esmar. She told the couple the captain's terms and left the decision to them. Recently, Samuel had been spreading rumors all over the island that Franz was not Esmar's son. If he brought the matter to court, the worst outcome would be that the earlier lease renewal could be invalidated. They might even lose Franz as their son. Now the captain promised that if they agreed to let him take Franz away, the boy could receive the best education in Paris and one day inherit a great fortune. In return, he would buy the house and land they lived on at Samuel's asking price and give it to them free of charge. Franz heard every word of the conversation between his parents and Livia from beginning to end. When the truth finally came clear, it struck him like thunder. At last, he understood what the word bastard truly meant. He was not his father's biological son at all. Helpless and devastated, Franz ran alone to the seaside where his father caught birds and refused to come home for a long time. And Vigdis, the sister who had once resented him, secretly took bread from the house. She only wanted to bring her little brother a bit of warmth, but her mother caught her before she could leave. Vigdis said her brother was furious because he had overheard every word they said. When the captain proposed taking Franz away, Johanna and Esmar were reluctant, but thinking the boy might have a better future, their hearts softened and they began to consider it. Yet when their son ran away after learning the truth, Johanna was jolted awake. She suddenly realized that all their selfish planning for his future had completely ignored Franz's own feelings. At that thought, her reason was swallowed by a flash of anger. Johanna poured all her fury onto Livia. She accused Livia of breaking the agreement they had made before for the sake of her own happiness. By that measure, the man she loved was even worse than Samuel, who had hounded Johanna for years.
Er det så, du har tänkt at vinna honom tillbaka?
Stäcka! Enten giver vi Franz væk, eller så giver vi gården og Franz væk. Hvad gør vi så? Jeg er træt. Gammel. Jeg har ikke kræfter til at starte forfra igen. Med 2 tomme hænder. Franz kan få et liv, som vi aldrig kan give ham. Det er virkeligheden.
Johanna could not imagine how her young son would endure one endless night after another once separated from his mother. But in the end, she could not overturn her husband's decision and could only wrap her anger in silence before turning back home alone. Esmar then went with the captain and his wife to the mayor's office. He also summoned the landlord, Samuel. The captain bought the land Esmar lived on for twice its price. In exchange, Samuel had to acknowledge Esmar as Franz's father and stop spreading false rumors. All Samuel had to do was sign, and the money would be his. But Samuel sneered and asked whether Franz was really worth that much. His words struck Esmar like a silent slap across the face. Helplessly, he brought that result home, and what awaited him there was his wife's sarcasm and his daughter's silent accusation. While he went to the seaside to search for his son, the captain's wife was also weighed down with sadness. Although she had never been a mother, she could still imagine how cruel it was to take a child away from one. Meanwhile, Esmar found his son by the cliff. Johanna bathed her son one last time and dressed him in the fine clothes brought by the captain. Before leaving, Franz opened the birdcage and took out the seabird he had cared for himself. Like his father, he snapped its neck without hesitation. In that moment, he completed the harsh ritual of becoming a true bird catcher, because he knew he would never have another chance. He did not embrace the parents who had made that cruel decision, but he hugged his 3 sisters tightly one last time. It was a child's silent protest, and all the reluctance he had left to give. Seeing the small boat carrying her brother move farther and farther away, Vigdis suddenly rushed toward the shore. She used all her strength, trying to push their boat out after him, and Esmar, who had been suffering ever since making that decision, finally stopped suppressing the tide inside him. He rushed after her. Father and daughter rowed together with all their might, yet they still could not catch the boat ahead. At that moment, Franz clearly heard his sister calling. Without the slightest hesitation, he tore off the expensive coat that symbolized his shackles. Then he plunged into the freezing sea and swam desperately back toward his family. The captain and his wife gave no order to turn back. They only accepted the outcome in silence. In that silence, husband and wife looked at one another, and in each other's eyes, they found the same relief, as if a heavy burden had finally been carried away by the waves. And Franz, the bird-catcher's son, after crossing the fog of identity, finally returned to the starting point of his life. The film deeply explores how love and instinct can ultimately bring redemption under extreme social pressure. The tragedy of Esmar and Johanna is that in fighting an unjust rule, they sacrificed the most genuine parts of their love and dignity. But the hope of the story lies in the next generation, who use their purest feelings and actions to teach their parents. A true home is built from love and shared memory. It cannot be defined or taken away by any outside rule or material condition. After learning the truth, Franz ran to the nearby shore where his father caught birds. In the end, he broke the seabird's neck. It was a ritual rich with symbolic meaning. By imitating and inheriting his father's craft, he tried to confirm his own identity as the bird-catcher's son, and resist the emptiness of bloodline. When he leapt into the sea, what he shed was not only an expensive coat, but every temptation represented by blood and wealth. He was not swimming toward a house or a piece of land. He was swimming toward a warm harbor built entirely from love. Though poor and cracked around the edges, the choices made by Franz and his father Esmar both quietly declare one truth: emotional belonging matters far more than blood inheritance.